We have this word because we are one of the most richly variegated states of India. We're a state that celebrated 243 languages. Indeed, a state that rejected monolingual states that were created in 1956 with the linguistic reorganization of states. It is ironic, but not surprising, that Kannada chauvinism has erupted in Karnataka, unthinkable before. This is partly a response to Hindutva's imposition of Hindi. It's also a response to the fact that we have a large number of Hindi-speaking immigrants to Bangalore who demand that Kannadigas speak in Hindi. Bahutva Karnataka is a thought group of individuals and organizations coming together to celebrate our threatened Bahutva. We have done this through talks, public interventions, campaigning during the elections, creating fact sheets that were widely used during the last elections. Some of us have made videos celebrating Karnataka's diversities. Others more directly argued that the BJP poses an existential threat to Bahutva in Karnataka. I'm extremely happy that we are hosting Rollo Romig today. Had she been alive, I have no doubt at all that Gauri Lankesh would have vociferously, raucously supported Bahutva Karnataka. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for introducing Bahutva Karnataka. And now over to the moderator, Shashank SR. Shashank will be moderating the session this evening. And he'll be joined by three other discussants, Mulya, Sachi, and Mali. We're still waiting for Rollo though. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yes, over to you, Shashank.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rohini. Thank you, Mohan, for a nice introduction to what Bahutva Karnataka has been doing over the past few years. I'm thankful for both the organizers of the event, Bahutva Karnataka, and other volunteers who have stepped in, including Rohini, Neeta, and others, Mohan himself, and others. Um, at the outset, I take this opportunity to also remember Gauri. I never probably got to um, see her, engage with her. I think that would always remain as one of the points that I would have wished for all through my life. Um, I'll, in the meantime, reflect on what um she meant for me over the years, what she has meant for me over the years, alongside our three discussants who are here to discuss the book, along with our author, Rollo Romig himself today. Um, to just give an introduction, one of the fiercest journalists and voices that we have heard from Karnataka was Gauri. Um, Gauri Lankesh actually started her own Patrike, Gauri Lankesh Patrike, sometime in the new new century. But she was, in fact, uh, building on a legacy of a newspaper, of a tabloid that was running in Karnataka from the previous century, P. Lankesh, more famous Lankesh Patrike. Uh, Over the last 20, 25 years, she grew out not just as a journalist, but also as an activist journalist who clearly took on the state, took on the status quo forces to side with the people all across her life. In what uh, was a very shocking moment for Karnataka's conscience. Um, on on uh, on 5th September 2017, she was assassinated. She was gunned down right in front of her house in what was a calm evening otherwise. Um, Ever since then, that alerted, I think, quite a bit of the Kannada citizenry, Karnataka's progressive set of people who have stood for freedom of expression, stood for rights of people, stood for the rights of the oppressed, to just take a moment, introspect on how where the country and the state is heading towards. Um, and ever since then, we have also seen quite a bit of protests, uproars that Karnataka has also witnessed, wherein Gauri was severely missed. Um, Across Karnataka, anytime you speak to any of the activists or student friends, student groupings, various other groupings as well that are working for the rights of the people, probably they would invoke a memory of her, stating that had she been there, probably we would have had one more voice with us today. So she lives on with us, and in fact, one of the most important um, uh, slogans that has come around has been that Naavu Gauri, Navellaru Gauri. After she was assassinated, the Karnataka citizenry actually took that she was not she might not have been with us physically anymore, but we'll all step up to raise the concerns, to raise the voices that she always stood for. And that was one of the momentary signs that actually tell us how deeply connected she was for Karnataka across various groupings. It was in this and I think it is these threads that join her to enable us to understand not just Gauri as an individual, Gauri as a journalist, Gauri as a woman, Gauri as an activist, but also uh, to understand where the country is heading and in what is deeply researched investigation into the killing of Gauri Lankesh. Rollo Romig actually um, uh, presents in his own book, I'm on the Hit List, A Journalist Murder and the Rise of Autocracy in India. This book was published in 24, last year in 2024. It's been quite some time, but nevertheless, discussions keep happening, and we all keep coming back to Gauri. So we remember her today through this discussion on the book. We'll be shortly joined by Rolo. But along with Rolo, we have three other discussants. I'm quite happy that all three of us of our discussants today are young, committed people who are working for the rights of people in their own ways, in their own little fields. Um, Let me take this opportunity to introduce all three of them before we go further. Uh, First, we have Manvi Atri. Manvi is a human rights lawyer documenting and legally fighting hate speech in Karnataka. She specifically monitors the patterns of how news coverage has changed and their relationship with people and the politics in Kannada media through her work with the campaign against hate speech. She also appears before self-regulatory bodies in cases of unethical reportage with the media and as a way to challenge the media impunity that is growing ever since Gauri has left us. Her work on hate mongers in Karnataka has been published in a book titled Freedom's Midnight Descent in Exile in Modi's India. She has also co-authored various other reports on how the media has been functioning over the last few years and also documenting a lot of human rights violations and how certain parts of Karnataka has largely been criminalized and has taken towards hate crimes. She is also a very active member of the People's Union for Civil Liberties in Karnataka. I welcome Manvi. Um, uh, the Manvi is one of the first discussants for the day. We also have with us Sachi Hegde. Sachi is an investigative journalist based in New Delhi, India. She reports on political economy, corporate corruptions, money laundering, and human rights violations. She is currently reporting fellow at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, collaborating with investigative journalists and independent newsrooms across the country on complex, high-stakes stories. Her work has appeared in the news, the News Minute, in the Wire, the News Minute, News Laundry, and Scroll. So I think she will also be able to share with us her few um, engagements, her how she relates to uh, Gauri as a young journalist, young woman journalist, probably hailing from Karnataka, and also reflecting on how the status of the media has undergone on a sea of changes. I welcome you, Sachi, for the discussion today. We also have another speaker, Amulya Leon. Amulya, we have known for her rights-based work. Probably all of us here in Karnataka would have heard her name. She's um, she is a loud voice for the rights of people. She has been working as a translator. In fact, she has contributed in translating a few sections for that provided the raw materials for Rollo Romig to actually come up with this book. She has also been pursuing public policy and governance in the recent years. Um, I welcome you, Amulya, for this discussion. Yeah. So the idea of the discussion was that we'll hear from Rollo first, and then probably have our three discussants discuss what they thought about the book and their reflections on the current patterns emerging in India today. Uh, but it seems like Rollo might take up some more time. So I wanted to ask if Sachi would want to go in first, and then we can have others pitching in. Would that be all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just share my screen 1 minute. So I made a presentation so that I don't forget points. This is my first time speaking. Yeah, is my screen visible?
Definitely, yes.
Okay, so I wasn't able to finish most of the book. I think I started reading and I'm still trying to finish it, but I'll be talking about the chapter Undeclared Emergency in Rollo's book. And I found myself resonating with many of the points that he makes. But what struck me the most is how he situates Gauri Lankesh's assassination not as an isolated incident, but as a part of a larger climate of silencing dissent. And I also found myself holding on to the words of Stephen Butler from Committee to Protect Journalists. He says there's very little to stop someone from killing a journalist because it's so rarely prosecuted. There seems to be a license that people feel to attack journalists in India. And this quote captures the environment many of us work in, one where impunity breeds fear and fear becomes a tool of control. And I really appreciate how Rollo doesn't just rely on statistics, but he also brings in voices from the field. His interviews with Danya Rajendran, Amu Joseph, for instance, sheds light on how journalists navigate this hostile environment day to day. His conversation with Ramachandra Guha too helps place this in a longer historical arc that what we are living through right now is a new kind of emergency which is not officially declared but is more widespread, insidious in many ways, more harder to resist. And this isn't just a theory for me. It is something that I live with as a journalist, which is why I think it is quite fitting that we are discussing press freedom today. My colleague, one of whom is my mentor, Ravi Nair, he's also in this meeting. They are currently fighting a defamation case filed against them by the Adani Group in Delhi. And it was an ex parte order asking them to take down content, some of which was more than a year old, and preventing them from publishing anything further about the company until the next court hearing. And it is honestly quite scary at times, but watching them refuse to give in to this intimidation and continuing to dig, to investigate, and to fight this case is deeply encouraging for me because I'm just starting out. And these are the very issues I want to work on and write about. And Gauri Lankesh was one such journalist who inspired me a lot. I think I was in the middle of finishing my 12th when Gauri Lankesh was assassinated. And honestly, at that time, I didn't really know who she was because I didn't come from a very politically aware background and journalism wasn't something that I had planned for. In fact, I was preparing to work right after my school to support myself. So at that time, my understanding of journalism and of the world in general was shaped by legacy media. I took what was published as fact, never really questioned who was writing, what was being left out, or who the silence served. And it's also partly because they don't really teach you in school how to identify misinformation and disinformation. They don't teach you how to read between the lines to understand power or propaganda. And I didn't learn this in a classroom. I had to learn this through my time as an activist, where I was part of Bahutva Karnataka. I was part of a student group called Collective. And I also, for some time, was working with Campaign Against Hate Speech. So by the time I decided to officially entered journalism, I had already encountered a whole different world of alternative media, which was very messy, urgent, full of risk, and yet deeply rooted in truth telling. And Gauri Lankesh became one of the journalists who was a guiding light for me in that journey. And she wasn't just a journalist who asked hard questions, you know. She wrote with clarity and courage that moved people. She wrote to create change. I remember watching a documentary about her on her birthday. I think it was called Gauri. And someone mentioned in the documentary that she was afraid of public speaking. That's something that I struggle with too. But that didn't really stop her from speaking out so boldly and so persistently. And that really stayed with me. So when I later entered journalism, I tried to carry forward the things I learned as an activist, to not become detached from the ground, to report in a way that builds solidarity, and to write in a way that makes people care. And I say all this not because I have some grand wisdom to offer. I'm just a young journalist, but I don't have decades of experience behind me, but I have the privilege of working with incredible journalists, and I carry with me the lessons I learned by watching them, the battles that they are fighting, and the silences that they're forced to navigate. I have published stories with independent platforms like the News Minute, Wire, News Laundry, and Scroll. And in these spaces, I've had the editorial freedom to pursue uncomfortable questions about corporate wrongdoings, elections, institutional failure, and many more. But that freedom often comes with a price. There are very few platforms willing to carry this kind of work, and even fewer that can pay or support long term investigations, because sometimes my team personally, we spend months on a story and it becomes a difficult project to sustain. And in mainstream media, it's even worse. My friends inside who work in big newsroom tell me that stories are regularly buried, not because they're wrong, but because they're too critical of the powerful, of the government. And most of the time, the censorship isn't always explicit, you know. It often happens quietly at the commissioning level or through endless editorial suggestions that strip a story of its meaning. And one of the reasons that it is happening so systematically is because of who owns the media. A large share of India's biggest television network and newspapers are owned by powerful corporate groups, many of whom have direct stakes in industries regulated by the state or in maintaining close ties with the government of the day. And this corporate capture means that editorial independence is compromised before a story even reaches the public. And we've seen examples of this very clearly. The Adani Group owns NDTV. Mukesh Ambani owns more than 70 media outlets that are followed by so many of Indians. And when ownership structures themselves are so deeply tied to political and economic power, newsrooms operate under invisible but very real red lines. So the result is that the stories that need to be told on corruption, on crony capitalism, on state repression, it either finds no space in the mainstream or they're reframed in a way that avoids blame. This is why independent media, however underfunded or vulnerable, it becomes crucial. It's one of the few remaining spaces where these stories can still be told. And while all of this is happening, independent journalists here and everywhere, they face online harassment, surveillance, and the growing fear of legal threats, which, for example, defamation, sedition, and even UAPA in some cases. So for many young journalists like me, the message from the state and the powerful is very clear. Do not cross the line. And that's why Gauri Lankesh's case is so important, not just because of how she died, but because of what she was fighting for and how hard it is to keep that fight alive today. So I want to take a step back today and reflect on how intimidation of journalists in India has changed over time, how the methods of control has evolved. So much of what I'll share today is drawn from the Committee to Protect Journalists Archives, who have been documenting the attacks on journalists from 1999. And I will also draw from what I've witnessed among my peers. For starters, it also helps to hold in mind some structural factors that condition press freedom in India. India's constitution provides for freedom of speech and expression, but the courts have which the courts have interpreted to include media or journalism. But this right is not absolute and can be curtailed for public order, defamation, etc. And historically, journalists in India have faced harassment, censorship, and violence, especially in states or regions with weak rule of law, communal tensions, or conflict zones. For example, Kashmir, the Northeast, or the Naxal Maoist areas. And a major structural constraint is impunity. Even when journalists are attacked or killed, perpetrators are often not prosecuted or punished, which sends a chilling signal to others, as we witnessed in the case of Gauri Lankesh. And over time, as India's media, environment, and government machinery has grown more technologically sophisticated, the tools for intimidation has also expanded. It has expanded from brute force to legal, administrative, and digital techniques. And in this evolving ecosystem, the ascendancy of Narendra Modi has emerged as a major inflection, both committed to protect journalists and Reporters Sans Frontiers explicitly labeled the post 2000 period as one in which press freedom has come under sustained strain. And it is important to also recognize that not all journalists face the same risks equally. The dangers are multiplied if you're from a marginalized community. For Muslim journalists, the criminalization has been severe. Siddiq Kapan, for example, was arrested in Uttar Pradesh while on his way to report on the Hathras rape and murder case. He was charged under the UAP and he spent over 2 years in jail before securing bail. For Dalit journalists, caste bias makes it harder to even enter or to be heard in mainstream newsrooms. Stories of caste violence are routinely downplayed or spiked by upper caste editors. And those who persist are often attacked outside the newsroom, sometimes for simply reporting atrocities in their own communities. And for women journalists, the harassment is relentless and gendered. As the book mentions, Rollo speaks to Ammu Joseph, who has observed that outspoken women face a special kind of hostility, even hatred. Threats almost always invoke sexual violence. And after Gauri Lankesh's assassination, no one can say these threats are just online abuse. And for queer and trans journalists, the challenge is near invisibility. Today, openly queer journalists face attacks both for their reporting and their identity in a climate where right-wing politics enforces rigid norms of gender and sexuality. So the intimidation that we are talking about is not only about what you report, but also about who you are. For many marginalized journalists, every byline is an act of defiance. And one can't fully understand attacks on journalists in India by looking at isolated incidents. You need to see how methods evolve, what kind of pressures intensify, and how tactics shift with political cycles, technology, and the ascendancy of particular governments, especially under Modi. So I'll go phase by phase. So first will be pre-Modi and the next will be during Modi. And within each, I'll call out the major tactics in use, giving examples. So in the beginning of 1999 and through the early 2000s, we've seen a disturbing pattern where journalists in India were attacked, harassed, and intimidated with alarming frequency. In 2001, Tamil Nadu saw one of the earliest coordinated crackdowns on the police in modern India. The police raided the Hindu, Sun TV, and Jaya TV. They arrested and interrogated journalists for stories that were critical of the then Chief Minister Jayalalitha. The entire editorial teams were dragged to court under defamation charges. It was a clear demonstration of how defamation law, state power, and police intimidation could be fused to punish dissent, which also set a template many other governments would later follow. And in the 2002 Gujarat riots, as communal violence unfolded, journalists covering the violence faced physical assaults and obstruction. Several TV news channels, including NDTV and Star News, had their local broadcasts blocked for inciting tension. Reporters were beaten while filming arson sites and press vehicles were vandalized. This was also one of the first times censorship became regionally targeted and politically motivated, which silenced independent coverage in real time. It revealed how in moments of crisis, the state could suppress documentation itself. And coming to the third point, between 2005 and 2008, there were grenade attacks on newspaper offices in the Northeast, particularly the Naharolgi, Todang, and the Sangai Express, which became a chilling routine. Editors received threats from both insurgent groups and security forces, each demanding coverage favorable to their cause. And in 2007, grenades were hurled into the Sangai Express office, injuring staff. And one editor later said that you can be killed for printing and you can be killed for not printing. And in smaller towns where reporters exposed corruption, land grabbing, or crime syndicates, the dangers were even greater. In 2008, Vikas Ranjan, who was a Hindustan Times correspondent in Bihar, he was shot dead after reporting on local misappropriation of government funds. And his case, like dozens of others, remains unsolved. And according to CPJ's report, most Indian journalists killed in the 1990s and 2000s were not national level figures. They were stringers or rural correspondents investigating corruption or land mafias. And their death often didn't make national news. And we come down to 2010 to 2014, where there was a hybrid pressure of legal and physical threats. The older methods of intimidation still persisted, but it was layered with legal harassment. And in states like Chhattisgarh, where local reporters were covering Maoist areas, they were arrested under anti-terror laws. And in Jammu and Kashmir, journalists were denied access during unrest. Their entire editions of local papers were blocked from publishing in 2010, and reporters were detained or beaten while covering protests. And by 2014, India ranked among the worst countries for justice in journalist murders. Committee to Protect Journalists Impunity Index has consistently placed India in the top 15 globally, a list that it still occupies. And most cases from the 2000s remain unresolved, underscoring how even in the pre-Modi period, the idea that journalists can be killed and will have no consequences was already normalized. Now, coming to 2014, when Narendra Modi became Prime Minister in 2014, many in the media expected pressure on independent journalism. And what we witnessed was the systematic intensification of pre-existing tactics, coupled with the introduction of new, highly sophisticated methods of control. And the shift was not just political, it was structural. Violence did not disappear, but it became part of a larger ecosystem of intimidation, which now included lawfare, economic pressure, digital surveillance, and narrative control. And I'm talking about the first point now, that even in this era, violence against journalists has remained an instrument of fear. And an example of this is the murder of Jagendra Singh. He was a freelance journalist from Shahjahanpur, Uttar Pradesh. And he wrote about illegal mining, land grabbing, and alleged corruption involving Samajwadi Party Minister Ramakant Yadav. And in June 2015, the police officers raided his home. And according to eyewitnesses and Singh's own dying declaration, he was set on fire by officers who poured petrol on him during the raid. And he suffered 60% burns and died a week later. Before dying, he recorded a video statement saying, "Why did the police set me on fire? If I die, Ramakant Yadav and the police should be held responsible." But no one was ever convicted. The case was later closed. His family, who were under pressure, had to withdraw their complaint. So it sends a very chilling message to small town reporters and to others as well, that even a Facebook post could cost you your life. It also marked the transition into a new era where digital expression met the old apparatus of violent suppression. The second point, the NewsClick. I think the NewsClick case epitomized this new form of control, where using UAPA to freeze accounts, raid journalists' homes, and arrest founders. The strategy of using legal instrument was to exhaust journalists rather than to convict them. And a very recent example of how law works in India against journalists is what happened to investigative journalist Ravi Nair. He consistently investigated the Adani Group's financial dealings and official offshore networks. And in 2021, Adani filed a criminal defamation case against him over a series of tweets and reports that he had published. And soon after that, he was served an arrest warrant from a Gujarat court without prior notice or summons. And he was forced to travel from Delhi to defend himself nearly 1,000 kilometers away. It wasn't about proving guilt. It was about punishment through the process. Then in 2023, after he co-authored an OCCRP investigation into Adani's offshore investors, he and another journalist were summoned by Ahmedabad police for questioning under vague notices which didn't specify any charges. The Supreme Court had to step in to grant them interim protection from arrest. And most recently in 2025, which was just a few weeks ago, him and my other colleagues were there was an ex parte gag order which barred them and others from publishing anything about the Adani company, and the company could decide what was defamatory and what was not defamatory. So these incidents reveal the logic of modern legal harassment. It's not about conviction or evidence, but draining journalists' time, money, and energy to make them think twice before publishing the next story. The third one is where journalists' laptops, phone, and notebooks are now routinely seized during raids, often without clear warrants. At the same time, digital surveillance has become a silent weapon. Several Indian journalists, including Ravi, they found that their devices were targeted by state-sponsored spyware like Pegasus. This means that even before a story is published, a journalist's call, messages, and contacts may already be compromised. And in 2025, a tax law further deepened this intrusion, which granted authorities sweeping powers to access emails, social media accounts, and encrypted device, effectively criminalizing privacy and blurring the line between investigation and intimidation. The result of that is now that journalists now operate with constant awareness that their data sources, their data, their sources, and even private conversation could be under watch. Censorship. So I think censorship is not only explicit, as I mentioned earlier, but it is now replaced by algorithmic erasure. In 2023, two independent digital outlets, the Kashmir Wala and Gaon Savera, they were blocked without warning or explanation. Their entire archives vanished overnight from the Indian internet. The second example is the new media policy in Jammu and Kashmir, which allows pre and post publication review, which grants the government authority to decide what counts as fake or anti-national. Financial control is also one which has quietly become one of the most effective forms of censorship in India. Instead of bans or arrests, the state increasingly uses economic levers and regulatory scrutiny to bring independent media to its heel. Tax rates, financial probes, and selective audits are now part of a familiar pattern. They don't always lead to convictions. They don't have to. The process itself sends a message that we can come for your funding, your advertisers, your office at any time. These actions create an effect not just on journalists, but also on donors, investors, and advertisers who fear association with critical outlets. In 2023, for instance, the BBC's India offices were raided by income tax officials soon after it aired a two-part documentary. The BBC later had to restructure its operations in India, a clear sign of how financial intimidation can achieve what direct censorship cannot. Independent digital outlets face similar tactics. The denial of FCRA renewals, delayed clearances for grants, and arbitrary application of company law audits all serve the same purpose: to drain resources and restrict financial oxygen to non-aligned media. I'll quickly, because I just received a message that I spoke more than 20 minutes, so I'll quickly wrap this up. So I'll quickly get to the self-censorship part, which I feel is the most pervasive outcome of this environment. Journalists increasingly avoid topics like corporate power, communal violence, or high-level corruption, not because the stories aren't true, but because the risks are too great. And Josie Joseph, in his book, A Feast of Vultures, has poignantly captured this. He says, editors routinely drop stories not because they lack merit, but because they're too risky. Reporters are encouraged to self-censor. In many media houses, it is understood that some subjects are best left untouched. And women journalists face compounded pressure. RSF found that many shut down their social media or left the profession entirely due to the sustained online harassment. And what has changed since 2014 is not the existence of repression, but its institutionalization. The machinery of democracy now houses the architecture of fear. And yet, there is resistance. Independent media spaces, however fragile, are fighting this and finding ways to sustain themselves. We are seeing the growth of strong networks of legal support, lawyers, activists, and civil society groups who step in when journalists are slapped with defamation suits, sedition charges, or UAPA cases. These networks don't just defend individuals, they send a message that independent journalism is not alone. We're also seeing cross-platform collaborations. Reporters from different outlets often underfunded and understaffed, are coming together to pool resources and publish powerful investigations that no single newsroom could manage alone. This collective model, where one story appears in multiple outlets at once, makes it harder to suppress and harder to ignore. And there's also a renewed effort to support freelancers and small-town reporters, who are often the most vulnerable voices working without institutional backing. But they're also closest to the ground realities. Independent platforms are stepping in to give them editorial support, visibility, and sometimes even legal and financial protection. And we are also experimenting with new methods of storytelling, which makes journalism more accessible and more engaging and harder to silence. And I think something that's more encouraging we see is the rise of journalism supported communities where readers and citizens who understand that independent media will not survive without their participation. These are all signs of resilience. They tell me that while the architecture of fear is real, so too is the architecture of resistance. This is where my hope lies, because even though the state and its allies will continue to try to silence us through intimidation, but independent media will continue to innovate, collaborate, and push back. And as long as we keep finding ways to speak truth to power, journalism in India, through even though under siege, will endure. Thank you. And I have my contact details here if anybody is willing to contact me for any stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sachi. Um, actually, oh, it took quite a bit of time in the sense that it was more than 20-25 minutes of your talk, but it, I think, actually captured what were all the changes that has happened in the field of journalism, what has been the way that resilience has been coming about by the independent media outlets in the times when the state is cracking down on journalists. In fact, it is very disheartening. Even after 8 years after the arrest after the assassination of Gauri, the SIT has been formed. 18 people were arrested in connection of the in connection with her murders. But when the people who were accused actually got bails last year around the same time, almost around September, just before it was her death anniversary. Uh, they were garlanded by the Hindutva fringe
Yeah.
elements when they were released on bail. Which is actually, in a sense, letting us know of the changed times that we are all working under, where fringe groups actually can garland some people who are actually accused under murder charges. Um, it is telling a lot of stories about how India has changed. In fact, Rollo, in what I found very interesting in the book is the fact that Gauri Lanke's murder is a detail through which we can unpack how the state has changed, how the society has changed over the last few years. And I think Rollo does quite a good job in that. Rollo has joined us now. Hello, Rollo. Um um, we thought we'll have you speak first and have all of our discussions have an interaction with you over the time. But I think we had to reshuffle it up a bit. And Sachi spoke about the changes that the field of journalism has seen through over the last few years and the attack on journalists and the other aspects related to it. Uh, I would want to ask you to probably reflect on your own writing. Maybe it's been over a year now since the book has been published, and you have also spoken at the various different platforms with relation to the book and otherwise. Uh, Maybe if you could reflect on those times, what has changed, or in fact, the fact that you have actually traced the investigations itself till one certain point, and then there has been a few updates as well. Were you able to keep track and other such issues that you want to discuss about?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry I couldn't be here earlier. I really want to thank Sachi for that excellent presentation. It's really it's such a reminder to me of everything that's happened over these decades, not just the past decade, but even longer. Because first of all, it's so important to remember that so many of these tactics against journalists long predate the Modi administration. That these attacks on journalists have been going on for quite a long time, and not just in the emergency either. That the Modi administration is picking up a playbook that already existed against journalists, adding new tactics to it. But it's really a deepening of a crisis that already existed in journalism. Um, and in that context, I just continuously find it absolutely remarkable how many brave Indian journalists persist under these conditions. I just really have to I'm just really in awe of it. And my book completely, every page relies entirely on the work of Indian journalists who are persisting in their work under these conditions. I really could have written none of it without being able to draw on that work. Um, it's also, the presentation. I really appreciate uh, the way you so densely compiled so many things that have happened because when an authoritarian government takes power, one of their tactics is doing everything at once and really deliberately trying to overwhelm, confuse the population by doing so many extreme things at once so that very little of it even feels like news anymore, or that you've already moved on to a new news cycle, to the newest outrage and the newest shock. And it can be really, even when you're immersed in it, even when you're trying to completely keep up on all of the news under an authoritarian government, you just you can't hold it all in your head at once. And it's very deliberate, you know? And I've been feeling this so intensely under the second Trump administration, which is even so much more authoritarian and autocratic than the first, that sometimes I'll hear a reminder of something that Trump did or one of his a member of his administration did last month, and I'll think, oh, I'd forgotten about that already. And it seems like it was many months ago, and it's confusing that it was that month because things are moving so fast, And so I often feel that it's incredibly valuable to keep putting together these lists like this of everything that's happened so we can keep it in front of mind and not forget uh, each step in the degradation of democracy as it occurs, and to not allow each of these increasing steps deeper into authoritarianism to be forgotten and normalized, because that's maybe the biggest danger of all, is feeling that life is normal under these conditions. It's so incremental, even while it's overwhelming and shocking. Um, and at the same time, though, it's really punishing psychologically, both on a personal level and kind of for a population, for a community, to be immersed in these details. And so it's kind of a no-win situation for people who are concerned about democracy, because it's very challenging to keep everything front of mind under these circumstances. And when you do, it's absolutely punishing to do so. And I think there's a real danger that remaining immersed in the details of an autocracy as you're living in it really leads to despair and cynicism, which is actually the worst possible position that you could take, because cynicism only leads to inaction. Um, but I don't have a really a great conclusion to land on in those observations. I just want to acknowledge it and just to appreciate the way that Sachi compiled all that there. I just think it's enormously valuable, and we need to keep doing that on all fronts, while also keeping an eye and a mind on what we can do under these circumstances. Um, which is not always clear, and there's not always a lot of great answers for what we could do in these circumstances. But but I think a lot of the answer is following the models of people around the world who have gotten through times like this. And and it's something that here in the US, I wish that a lot of us had done a lot sooner, is recognize the path that we were going down and studying the examples of other countries that have emerged from authoritarianism. The authoritarian is using a playbook. It's a time-worn playbook. You can actually, many scholars who study authoritarianism and dictatorship uh, have compiled what this playbook looks like and have written entire books warning, like, these are the steps as you descend into an autocratic state. And uh, it's challenging to listen to them when you don't feel like you're there yet, because everyday life mostly feels normal. It mostly does go on as it has before, unless and until the state is coming for you, or unless you are confronting the state, sometimes as a journalist. Then you feel it. But when you're among a privileged population that is not under state scrutiny at that moment, uh, this is again, I think one of the challenging lessons of authoritarianism is that things can feel very normal. When you walk out on the street, it's not like everything's changed, you know? It's not like there's someone to tell you you lost your democracy and now your country looks completely different. Your country looks the same, you know? And it requires really just an awareness and an attunement to everything that's happened, and also concern for what's happening to your fellow citizens, not just citizens, but fellow community members who have been most keenly affected by it. And yeah, you know, oh yeah, my point was about learning from other places. I feel like in this context, I'm sure that a lot of you can relate to this in the Indian context as well. When Trump first took over here, uh, a lot of us were warning we're on a very clear road to fascism right now, and we need to be recognizing kind of what stage we are in that process, studying the examples of where it's happened elsewhere, and already looking now at how we get out of it. But mainstream political and media voices kept saying, oh, that is outrageous, that's hysterical, you're overreacting, this is not fascism, it's ridiculous to compare Trump to these figures in fascism. And so that actually delayed that constant drumbeat of naysaying what we all were seeing with our own eyes, really delayed our ability to formulate a response, and to really accurately study the historical context in which these things were happening. Because both in India and in the US, uh, it's not like fascism ever entirely went away. There's a very direct through line from the original fascist movements to what's happening now in each of our countries. In India, 100 years ago, the RSS was formed explicitly on the model of Italian fascist organizations. Some of the ideologues who created the RSS went to Italy and directly studied these organizations, and even in at least one case met with Mussolini. And so it's not, uh, it's not like it's only a conceptual connection we're making here. It's a direct thread. And it's the same in the US. I've often felt that it's not, we've whitewashed our own connection to fascism in the US, by in part because, of World War II, that we became, these famously big opponents of the Nazis and the Italian fascists in World War II. And so it became politically and kind of patriotically necessary to assume an anti-fascist position after that war began. Before the war started, European fascism was pretty popular in the US. In the town where I grew up in, Detroit, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, there was a preacher, Father Coughlin. He was actually a Catholic priest who was one of the very most popular radio broadcasters in the United States. I think he had the biggest radio audience in the United States for a talk program, and he was an outright fascist, directly supporting what was happening in Italy and Germany as it unfolded before we entered the war. As soon as we did, those voices were suppressed, but that tendency still existed and never went away. And the right wing in this country has been, over the past 80 years, continuously, very deliberately, very patiently, and very systematically building towards a return of the fascist movement. Even as all of our institutions have insisted that America is a great democracy, America is fundamentally anti-fascist, none of it's true. The conditions have always been there all the way through. And now they found their moment, and they've made their return. And it's not too late though for us to study the examples of how this happened in the past and how people got out in the past, because that is the bright spot, is that in many places around the world, nations that have been through quite severe autocracy and authoritarianism have emerged from it. And the best time to have studied that history would have been many years ago, but the second best time is right now. I'd love to take any questions, or if you have anything specifically at the book that you'd like to ask.
We have actually, Rollo, we have actually asked the participants to send in their questions. We can probably await until Amulya and also Manvi reflect on the book and this thing. But in the meanwhile, if I could ask you to just elaborate a bit on how did you come about writing the book? I have, all of us here have read it. Maybe for the viewers, um, why did you think of Gauri's assassination as a way in which you could reflect on a few things? The whole writing process also, if you could reflect on that, would uh, provide a larger context for our viewers, was what we were thinking.
I had this question
Sure.
as well. Mhm.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that a bit. So, I started spending a lot of time in India starting, around 15 years ago, or a little before 15 years ago. Actually, it happened through marriage. My wife is from Kerala, and and I was just getting started as a freelance magazine journalist at that time. And I don't know, just the way those two things coincided, I started spending a lot of time in India for family reasons, but then it was immediately obvious to me that it was a place I wanted to write about, and specifically South India, because it immediately struck me that in the American context, American journalists tend to focus overwhelmingly on North India in their reporting, tend to be based in New Delhi, tend to be focused on national politics, and then when they write stories about other regions, they tend to not go too far afield, not travel too far from Delhi. And it struck me immediately that, since I was coming, my kind of entry point to India was, the far south in Kerala. I was immediately struck, well, this place is nothing like the India that I've heard about in the US media. It's a completely different country, really. And that, that India is really best thought of as a consortium of countries, perhaps, or as something more akin to Europe in terms of its cultural, linguistic, um, culinary, you name it, diversity, than what we typically think of as a country. Um, and I feel that there's kind of an odd thing about India because it's so enormous. Its regional diversity actually gets underestimated. Like, if Kerala were its own state, I'm sorry, if Kerala were its own country, it would probably have a more distinct international reputation than it does because it's kind of hidden away in India, in the international consciousness or in the American consciousness. And because Americans in particular, unfortunately, we tend to, on a whole, generalizing, be very incurious about countries outside the United States. And so at best, we often just know a very sketchy caricature of other countries. And so when a place is as complex and diverse as India is, it's very unlikely that Americans will know the details. And so I just kind of immediately took it as my just personal mission as an American journalist to try to do what I could to correct this this impression um, of India as a monolithic place, and just to actually really celebrate South India in all of its many facets in the work that I was doing. Meanwhile, interestingly, my time in India happened to coincide with a project within India aimed at homogenizing the country and aimed at deliberately making the country more monolithic and making it more like North India in many ways. And also, a very deliberate political project to make Hinduism more homogenous. Because so much of what I said about India could also be said for Hinduism, that it is just an almost unimaginably diverse religion that, like India itself, there's almost nothing you can say definitively about it where the opposite might not also be true, like, foreigners tend to have this idea of Hinduism as being a fundamentally polytheistic religion. Well, there are plenty of monotheistic Hindus. There are atheist Hindus. You name it, any quality that you could name. And the same goes for India itself. And it's been famously said, I forget the academic who said it, but there's no one thing you can say about India without also saying the opposite, which is also true. Which kind of, so I think about that point often in the context of press freedom in India, where even as it India is so accurately described as an incredibly hostile environment for journalists and is accurately placed very low down in the country's uh, uh, on lists of press freedom among countries, that nonetheless, the paradox is that in many ways, journalism continues to flourish in India, although it becomes much harder to do, much harder to access, um, and is often overwhelmed by compromised journalistic sources. But anyway, that was kind of like my whole host of inspirations in beginning my work in India. But of course, I had just an enormous amount of work to do to catch up as an outsider, and an enormous responsibility as someone coming in from the outside to get things right. So I've always been very slow in what I do. Um, I have not been extremely prolific, actually, in the work that I do, because I feel just a really intense responsibility to get things right. It's not worthwhile to me at all to publish anything unless I feel confident that and I still make mistakes, but unless I feel confident that I'm as accurate and as nuanced and have listened to as many perspectives as possible before I publish anything. So that was certainly the case with the book. Where back in um 2019, I guess it was, I signed a contract to write this book, and the contract stipulated that I would complete it in 18 months, and it actually took 6 years. So I have no regrets about that, though, because I would, if I if I were forced to publish what I had completed within 18 months, I absolutely would have refused because it just takes a lot longer to do it right. And And it's also, as with almost everything that you encounter in journalism, as in life, once I started digging into it, everything is vastly more complicated than I imagined that it would be when I started, which is precisely what interests me. I want it to be more complicated. And I want to meet the challenge of trying to describe the complexity, which, I think the results are mixed, but this is what I'm in it for, you know? Um, and in terms of how I got specifically on the specific subject of Gauri Lankesh's assassination, my family and I had increasingly been spending a lot of time in Bangalore. I love Bangalore. I think it's just a great city. It really became quickly one of my favorite cities in India, and we were just spending time there. We were just coming up with excuses to spend time in Bangalore. I was often working on stories that had nothing to do with Bangalore, but I would spend time writing there. I love its atmosphere. I love its how amazingly it's maintained this kind of laid back attitude, even as it's become a mega city. The climate, of course. Um, and just the literary culture is extraordinary. I write about this in the book, but Church Street, which is one of the main streets in Bangalore, has really the most extraordinary booksellers row that I've encountered in India. So I just love all these aspects of Bangalore. And we'd actually been thinking of moving to Bangalore at that time, moving entirely. Right now I'm in New York City. I ended up staying here. But so that was the context in which I had just left Bangalore for a month. Um, I'd just been in Bangalore for a month, had just left when Gauri was assassinated. Unfortunately, I had never met her, but I think, pretty much all my friends in Bangalore had and knew her. And so I definitely knew of her and her work. And so it came as an incredible shock to me as it did to everyone else. And just this feeling that let alone the particular circumstances of her murder, it just seemed shocking that anything like that could happen in Bangalore. You so rarely hear of gun crime of any kind in Bangalore. So even that alone was such a huge shock. Um, and I immediately wanted to write about it, and my editor at the New York Times Magazine was like-minded, and she actually wrote to me and asked me if I would write about it when I was in the middle of drafting an email to her, asking if I could write about it. Um, and then, but as I worked on that magazine article, it was a long magazine article, but it was immediately obvious I was only scratching the surface, and I really wanted to go much deeper. And so I kind of abandoned all other plans in my life and spent the next 6 years working on this book. Um, I see a question has come in the chat
Yeah.
from Mohan. I'll read it out. A question about, is there one book I'd recommend about the prehistory of fascism? Oh, that's such a good question. I don't have a great book recommendation on hand about that. Oh
Rolo,
gosh.
if
Yeah.
I may, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
If that is the case, maybe you can take some time off to just think about it and get back on that
Yeah.
question, and also wait for others also to raise more questions. I was also thinking Amulya and Manvi also have quite a bit to add in. Uh,
Yes,
Manvi's work
I
also.
would I would absolutely love to hear a lot more from the other
Yeah,
panelists. So please.
yes,
Yeah.
sure. Um, Manvi, can I invite you first? Amulya, who wants to go in? Uh,
Anything's good.
yeah. If that being the case, Amulya, would you want to go in first? Um, in the meantime, I also was just reflecting on what Rollo was sharing. on the fact that we might want to look back at different models or different works of people as, say, where we can take it forward. And incidentally, today, 28th September, we have two great important events that links to the day. One is Bhagat Singh himself's birth anniversary. No more better inspiration than Bhagat Singh. Um, Definitely. Also, I remember the times when our friend and comrade in arms, Clifton, also was sharing how Bhagat Singh does not allow us to get into the sense of despair and cynicism that Rollo was speaking about. Um, that being one part, then the second is also that today is the unfortunately the death anniversary of one more person who was hacked to death. Thanks for his works for the rights of the oppressed, Shankar Guha Niyogi. He still inspires thousands of journalists, activists, human rights defenders across the country. I think we have our models. We all, in fact, in this event as well, the point of it was September is a month where we all come back to remember Gauri in whatever ways we can. Um, so all of these three have provided us the ways in which we can go back, look into what they have done, how can we take it forward, and such ideas. Um, just also wanted to share how I got to know of Gauri's work. I have grown up all my life in Bangalore, but incidentally, the first time I got to hear about Gauri was not in Bangalore, but when I was in my master's in Hyderabad, um, where students from across the country, all of us were coming together as student groupings, student activists. And then we were trying to paint up the walls of our campus with some slogans, some things that could inspire a lot of students. And our friends from various other states actually thought, why not we draw up a sketch of Gauri? That was my probable first introduction. It was long after Gauri was gone in 2019, I suppose. But fortunately, the press that her colleagues founded after her death, um, I was able to come back and uh, get myself involved with some sort of work for quite a bit of time before I could move on to other things. So Gauri has that special memory for me. I just wanted to share it as well as a small. Amulya also has helped in the quite a bit of translation for this work. I would probably wish her if she could reflect on her engagement with the book, with Gauri and many other things that she has been part of in Karnataka. Over to you, Amulya.
Okay. Am I audible now? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hi, Rollo.
Hi,
um,
Amelia.
so I've learned my lesson. I write down my speeches before I give them now. So I've written something down, and I would like to follow the same as I speak here now. Sometimes the most defining journeys begin by accident. Mine did. I didn't set out to become a translator, and there was this company called the Bangalore Recording Company, and back in the days they used to produce hyper local news as podcast. Even before podcasts became cool, Bangalore Recording Company was doing hyper local journalism and sending these bits through WhatsApp. And they were looking for a voiceover artist, and somehow they happened to like my translation of the news rather than me saying the news. So that's how it all started. And only 3 months into this unexpected role, Rolo reached out to me. I don't remember the details of our first conversation, but I do remember meeting him on Church Street. So that meeting, I think, sort of changed a lot of things for me. So back then, I hadn't fully grasped what this work could mean to me or what this work entailed. All I knew was that it was some legal document and it was about Gauri, and that was enough. It was only when I began reading through the material that the weight of this whole work began to sink in. This wasn't just translation. This was the anatomy of a hate-fueled murder. It was chilling to see how people could hate and organize themselves into something so calculated, something so structured. Um for me, it became a kind of return point or a going back story, because my first memory of Gauri in this context was seeing her lifeless body. Because I was 17 then, and I remember somebody calling us, and they were like, Gauri Lankesh was shot dead. And all I know was 17-year-old me traveled all the way from Mysore to Bangalore in train by myself, because I wanted to have that one moment of having known her in this proximity, perhaps. Because I also wanted to be a journalist, and studied journalism. And I remember reading some of Gauri's columns while I was growing up, because both my parents follow Lankesh Patrike and Gauri Lankesh Patrike, and both of them have been active in terms of activism itself. So for me, among the many texts that I read and I translated for this work, one that stayed very close to me has been Indira Lankesh's autobiography. It was honest, raw even. She didn't romanticize her relationship with P. Lankesh or her children. She didn't rap and produce P. Lankesh as this big picture guy, as the stalwart of Kannada literature and all of that. None of that. She cut all of that, and she was like, "Oh, my husband was like this, and this was my life with him." She didn't center her identity around her children either. And let's be honest, children who choose this path often give their mothers a hard time. You can ask mine. But Indira was unfazed. She was unapologetic about it. And she saw Kavita, Gauri, and Indrajit as just her children. Um, so this book of Indira Lankesh shouldn't just be seen as a window into the Lankesh family life, and rather, I was mentioning it before, should be seen as a feminist text also. How people who are associated with famous people have their life going on about, and I think she's very honestly put her story out there. So, apart from this, I also translated the statements of the accused. So, with my own experience with the police department and the judiciary and everything, this something that I find my responsibility to share with everyone, that not all of these statements might be true. We must accept that police pressure is real. Statements can be manipulated, but even if parts of those statements are false or true, the larger picture remains clear. That a group of people, driven purely by ideological hate, conspired to murder someone who dared to speak. I think to bring this news as a book through a thorough study of Gauri's life, not just her professional or activist life, but by also peeling open her personal life, her parents, her siblings, how her father was. Uh, this work by Rollo has paid a befitting homage to the glorious life that Gauri lived. It shows us the way forward. So P. Lankesh came from the Bandaya and Navya movement, if I'm not wrong. So Gauri didn't grow up in a vacuum. Progressive thinking wasn't something that's new to her. And while it may not have been out of social or financial privilege, it was definitely one kind of intellectual privilege, if we can call it that. And that somehow matters. But she never really escaped her father's shadow. Not because she couldn't. Of course, she could. She could have stayed back with her cushiony job in an English publication or bigger news media houses. But she chooses to come back and return to where it all begins for her in, say, her intellectual privilege, right? Uh, because her reality wouldn't let her. Her feelings were her own, her politics also her own. She was free in a way that most very few people are these days. So there's something that I want to quote here, which Gauri said in her Nandita Pratibha Kumar interview. And this, I think, is a very this was my takeaway from the works that I translated. So she says, now that I have turned into an expert in both English and Kannada, I find myself at loss of words while speaking. leading to a search for English words while conversing in Kannada and looking for Kannada words while speaking in English. But I manage it. In my opinion, like my father said, people who understand better if we present our thoughts honestly and in a simple way. Uh, so I have maintained this simple policy. So I have done this for 15 years now. So these are words of Gauri Lankesh. So we can see that there is this culture of honesty that they're following. And lately I've been reading a bit of anarchism. So I was trying to hold Gauri in parallels with how anarchy might operate. And anarchy, I think, is this just feeling that I am free enough to act in a certain way or live a certain way. So now to say Gauri was anarchist, it would be a bit of a stretch, right? She wasn't an anarchist per se, but she was someone who pushed boundaries. She questioned the norm. She challenged power. And yeah, those are not crimes. Today, we live in a time where this cancel culture is treated like entertainment, but it doesn't stop at hashtags. It manifests into real consequences. I know I shouldn't be saying the next part, but even to mention Charlie Kirk and Gauri Lankesh in the same sentence might seem absolutely absurd. But cancel culture, whether in America or in India, works the same way. It punishes dissent, it amplifies outrage, and it justifies violence. The problem is when we approve of something, we normalize it. And that norm doesn't come with filters, it applies across the board. So when people are so quick to silence others, it just sets a precedent that anyone can be silenced. And next time, it could just be you. Which is why we must have a government that is more tolerant to criticism, and that will translate into how the citizenry reacts to opinions, to just debates, to dialogues, because that should be its job. That should be the government's job to translate the law for people, not enforce their worst instincts as norms. So Gauri believed in that kind of India. And perhaps the best way we can to remember her is not through statues or hashtags, but by refusing to stop asking questions. So that, I think, should be the biggest lesson that we learn from Gauri's life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amelia. I'd love to jump in and just respond a little bit to some of what Amelia said, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I just, I just think that was so beautifully put, Amelia. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. And I also just, I mentioned before that writing this book was so heavily reliant on the work of Indian journalists and writers, but no one more than Amelia was kind of the overwhelming contributor and collaborator on this book. And it was really just one of the great privileges for me of working on this book is getting to meet and work with and get to know Amelia. And neither of us could ever have imagined all those years ago when we met on Church Street at Indian Coffee House, uh, just what a long and winding journey this would be for both of us. And there's actually a whole chapter in the book about Amelia and about her own story, um, which she really, generously shared with me. And yeah, there's so much to think about in what you just said. I just really appreciate every minute of it. I love what you said about, and I just want to give some context to the fact that, Amelia mentioned this memoir by Indira Lankesh. So both of Gauri's parents wrote memoirs, and but they have only ever been published in Kannada, and which I don't read. And so I thought, wow, Amelia had already been doing a lot of translation for me, like she said, of documents, legal documents, uh, you know, this um uh this charge sheet that was over 9,000 pages, most of it in Canada. And so I had her translating key excerpts of it and that kind of thing. But then when I realized that, I wasn't going to be able to access these memoirs. I just felt like I couldn't write a book about Gauri Lankesh without reading her parents' memoirs. I couldn't just leave that on the table. And so I asked Emily to translate those. And so she translated two entire books from start. She had, you know, some friends helping her, but it was almost overwhelmingly her work. And yeah, you know, just kind of it's just funny to me in retrospect the lengths we went to. And so I don't think that anyone's even read these English translations of those two books except the two of us. It was just like this very private audience just so that I could, but I really hope that her work was remarkable on translating those two books. And I hope that they get published in English sometime because like you're saying, Amelia, I felt exactly the same way about Indira's memoir. You know, P. Lankesh, Gauri's father, is the celebrated religious figure. He's this giant of Kannada literature, and he is an extraordinary writer. Just like you, I was really, in terms of the two memoirs, a lot more struck and engrossed by Indira's memoir for all the reasons you said. That's the one that I keep thinking about. I think it's amazing that she'd never written a book before, or really done much writing at all before. Maybe that was an advantage in a way, that she came to it without this baggage of expectations as a writer and could just write honestly and directly. I think it's really an extraordinary book, and like you said, just this deeply feminist document. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'll refrain from doing it. I just kind of want to go through point by point and respond in appreciation of everything you said because it was just all so beautifully put. But but yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of the context there, and you know, and just appreciation for the role that you played in this book. It just wouldn't have existed in this form if we hadn't had that fateful meeting those 8 years ago. And I should also give credit to Nisha Susan, who introduced us and who also was just I'm sure many of you know her. She's just this extraordinary connector of people, among many other things, as Gauri was too, you know. And of course, Nisha and Gauri knew each other as well. But this really stands out to me that, like, you know, people like Nisha and Gauri were you know, have this incredible talent for connecting people. And it's the kind of talent that every movement, every big project completely relies upon. And it's a thing that's underestimated and undervalued as a talent. And it's the kind of thing that is, I think it's often for sexist reasons because it's often the kind of thing that work that women end up doing, that very hard work of building community and connecting people. And it's typically not compensated and it's typically underestimated and not recognized. And but we none of us could get anything done without it. Uh, I'll just say one more thing. I really appreciate what you were saying about Gauri in the context of anarchism. I'm also very interested in anarchism as a political philosophy. And Gauri, you know, it's interesting. Like Gauri had no interest in political philosophies. She'd never anytime people talked about political factions, she was like, going on with this nonsense. Like, come on, let's do things. Let's not talk about theory. But I do think that she was kind of an instinctual anarchist, you know? Um, I I think about, you know, even in the context of what I was just saying about, you know, this work of community building, which is so actually central to anarchism, just as an approach. Um, she was so, you know, anarchism it's associated with, you know, wild rhetoric and violence and assassination, which, you know, kind of in the popular imagination, because this was in the United States when anarchism was a much more prominent political philosophy. It took some of these forms in the late 19th century. The times have changed a lot, and anarchism as a movement has changed a lot. And from the beginning, it's one of its main focuses has always been on the concept of mutual aid. Um, And I really think that Gauri embodied this practice of mutual aid. She was someone who was there for people and who knew how to build and draw on networks to help people with problems that were being ignored. Um, and I will give one, I wasn't able to give a book recommendation in the earlier question. There is one book I would recommend on this topic, which is called Everyday Anarchism, by the writer Shuli Branson. And I think about it a lot. It's really an extraordinary book. It's really about how kind of these concepts that emerge from anarchist thought can really be lived in day-to-day life, that we don't need to wait for some utopia. Um, I think about this stuff so much in the context of Gauri and just how she instinctually lived by these non-hierarchical principles aimed at mutual aid. Yeah, so whether she would have called herself an anarchist or not, I really like thinking of her in that context, that she really embodied this very beautiful and very generous way of thinking.
I think that was an interesting discussion, actually. In fact, I was just checking the chat, and Mohan has actually stated that it was a very moving um, talk by Amulya. It was indeed moving, at least for me, and I think I can speak for others as well. There are a few more questions that are coming up. We'll wait until Manvi also has spoken. Manvi, we have worked together on various fronts. She has also fought the issue of hate speeches and hate crimes in Karnataka in a very rooted way, in the sense while she is also a member of the national organizations, she is very rooted in Karnataka's politics, Karnataka's happenings, everyday happenings. So I would want her to probably reflect where, if at all, she draws strengths from Gauri or any other ways. What was her thoughts on the book, and also what was the relation that she finds with the works of Gauri herself, working in fighting the hate speech part of it. Over to you, man.
Thank you so much for such a, I think, for all of you for such an enlightening discussion. And what I'm going to try and do, I think we've all been here for quite some time, but I think an opportunity to talk about Gauri, the book, and just what she means to those of us who find ourselves in Karnataka in the reality of the communalized context. I think I'm going to take a little bit of time too, so please bear with me. And I want to speak about three things about in the way that I speak. One is the personal, the second is the political, and the third is the structure of the law, which draws from the political. And the first thing I want to start with, and I think for me, my biggest window into understanding Gauri, her work and her politics has been the writing and the reflection of Shiv Sundar, who is a very close comrade of Gauri. And I want to start by reading a poem he wrote in her memory. It's called Gauri Became the Gauri. He writes, Gauri, wanton wayfarer, father's favorite peacock feather, who refused to come under his wings. Amidst kites that did not fly, horses that did not run, you reach your destiny, crawling like an ant. Cool scarlet honge flower that grew out of the giant banyan tree, though abandoned by undependable words, you completed your journey through your deeds. Neither obsessed with glory nor infatuated by any sense of achievement, you continue to live an accomplished life even after death. Outwardly hasty, but slow inside, burning yourself, you purified your inner self, wiping out the difference between the inner and the outer. You became a Mahamani, where everyone had a space. You never doused burning truths with restrained, watery words, nor wrapped the naked world with erudite drapery. You refused to label the myths of post truth as information, wrote nothing except what you saw as you saw. Yes, some words there, some punctuations here were not needed. But would it have changed the target of the bullets? Name a fence sitter killed for the following a safe middle path. Why then Gandhi, the most religious one, was also killed. You loved, and hated hate. You melted, grieved, wept, grew angry, fought. You became mother, teacher, word, meaning, purpose. Dusky, red, blue, green, white. Became the spectrum of the rainbow, a hope, a possibility, a symbol of immortality. You became Gauri, defying death. You became thousands of Gauris. Shashank started by saying that one of the things that many of us resonate with in Karnataka is Nanu Gauri, Navu Gauri, Navu Ellaru Gauri. And that's very true for those of us who have not even had the good fortune of meeting her. This actually, one of the first things that I got a chance to work on as a law student was a report that documented the kind of hatred that we were seeing that the dissenters were facing during the CA protests. And the report's title, Wages of Hate, Journalism in Dark Times. And we released it, marking it and dedicating it to Gauri. And in that book also, we reflect upon the role of Gauri in that sense, in understanding Karnataka and the communalization in Karnataka. For somebody who never met her, for somebody who only got the chance of reading her work and only heard about her through people. I think something that I keep going back to and what has helped me feel belonged in Karnataka, like Rollo kept saying, Bangalore just feels like home, and you want to keep coming back here. I think it's her strength of wanting to come back here, despite her being such a fantastic journalist, writing in English, knowing English, but knowing the strength of wanting to come back to the vernacular of speaking in Kannada. She realized, I think Shiv Sundar speaks about this a lot as somebody who would struggle to find the difference between Haley and Haley, you know, and would often be mocked for it. She very quickly started correcting Shiv Sundar's Kannada in his writing. And I find that very inspiring for somebody who wasn't born in Karnataka, but feels a sense of belonging here, and who feels that inspiration that Karnataka is my home, Kannada is my language. And I feel that sense of why that sense of belonging also from the syncretic traditions that Bahutva Karnataka speaks about. So the imagination of a plural Karnataka. And that's really the personal that I wanted to talk about in terms of how Gauri, being the fierce journalist that she was, continues to inspire so many of us. And we aspire to be like her in terms of don't want to do this work for elite English-speaking people. We want to dissent. We want to fight this authoritarianism. We want to fight this fascism. We want to create a wave of humanization, rationality, in the hearts and minds of Kannadigas. And that's really the hope and the dream. And how that really connects to the political is, for me, the death of Gauri and the book, also Rollo, it's a fantastic book. I was hoping we'd actually get a chance to talk about it a lot more today, but I think that's not sort of happened organically because Gauri being Gauri just, has drawn us all in all her personality. But I think it's remarkable because of the writing in the way that you create a picture for us. Like the beginning of the book starts with creating an imagery of the slowness of Bangalore and how the traffic is and how, it really draws in each of us to situate ourselves in that present moment and almost relive, even though we weren't there, what it must have been to witness that assassination over there. And one of the most remarkable things in the book for me is not just the descriptive nature of it and it creating this vivid imagery for each part of the book, but also intertwining the political in it. And by that, I mean, there's one sentence in the book that's really stayed with me about the many, many sentences that are remarkably written is, there's freedom of speech, but there's no freedom after speech. And I think that's truly the reality of Gauri, but also the reality of how we have to hold the dilemma of today. And by that, I mean, in my work as a lawyer who has had to see hours and hours of hateful television media, some parts of which we had people who are here in this room being targeted by Kannada media. And in doing that work, we hold this polarity, which is on one hand, you have a journalist like Gauri who in exercise of a freedom of speech, after that does not have freedom and loses her life altogether. And on the other hand, you continue to have journalists who call themselves journalists like Ajit and many others, H.R. Ranganath. And that's the thing, right? The reason I'm talking about the Kannada journalist is because in the quote unquote mainstream understanding of India, we don't really understand that actually the largest viewership of television media, of vernacular media, is more than English media. English media is viewed by 1% of people. 99% of people view vernacular media. And so you think that the impact that a Times Now make, a Republic makes is huge. Sure, in terms of political discourse, but in terms of the hearts and minds of people, it is the Kannada media. It is very much the Kannada media, and which is where Gauri's role also was, and which is why she was shot the way she was shot, right? So which is why also the thousands of people who just after hearing the news of her death, came for the procession of paying her respects to her life and the kind of life she lived. And so when you hold this polarity, there is a journalist who is speaking truth to power, who is remembering, who is talking about the struggles of caste, class, religious, and minorities and marginalized people, and the structure of the state itself. And then on the other hand, you have somebody who has the entire protection of the state machinery, who are these so-called journalists who are occupying spaces in Karnataka. I want to give an example of something that's happened, two examples rather, of something that's happened very recently in the last 5 years in Karnataka. And I think that they speak to a very important moment in Karnataka, which is the moment of how, for example, the anti-conversion law came into force, and how, for example, the hijab ban was enforced. And the reason I'm saying these two examples are very important is because I think they realize the right-wing ideology, the Hindutva ideology, which has found its footing for the first time in the south of India and Karnataka, right? We have to recognize that Karnataka is the first South Indian state to recognize and give space and legitimacy to this ideology. And so in doing that, what do these two moments mark? The first moment is that of the anti-conversion law. So many people who have been a part of Karnataka circles, who watch the news, they also don't know this. The anti-conversion laws, which have been passed in many other states, 10 other states to be precise, in Karnataka, they did not come at the behest of the state. They did not come at the behest of a public campaign. They actually came at the behest of the Kannada media. So the Kannada media live streamed exposes, what they called, and sting operations, what they called, of series of prayer meetings, innocuous prayer meetings, where they claimed that forced religious mass conversions were taking place. And what did they show in these meetings? They showed just prayer meetings, somebody giving a prashada, somebody giving some water, just some exchange that was happening. And they claimed this narrative of forced mass conversions. And for 9 months, it was a concerted campaign run by media houses to say that if you see a forced mass conversion taking place in your locality, file cases against them, file FIRs against them, right? Go file a case under 295A of the IPC, now the BNS, of saying hurting religious sentiments. And so the speaking of the anchors was directly to a Hindu audience. They were not speaking to people. They were speaking to a Hindutva audience to say that if you see people praying, you have a recourse, right? You can barge into the prayer meeting, you can go with the cops, and you can attack them with the force of the law. And this is the change that I'm talking about, of building a news-consuming public that is not subservient to the Constitution of India, that does not believe in the Constitution of India, but it believes in the public and a popular morality of Hindutva, which is so far away from constitutional morality, which is so far away from the ideals of Constitution of equality, liberty, fraternity, freedom of conscience. These almost seem like distant dreams at this point to even talk about. So this moment 9 months of this campaign takes place. The next session, the next legislative assembly session, they try to table the bill. It does not get passed. They push it through as an ordinance. And I want to take this moment to mark that despite the Congress government being in power, they do not have the political will today to withdraw the law, to withdraw the ordinance. There are cases that are filed under the law. There's a report called the Criminalizing the Practice of Faith that the PUCL had done, which documented that how this was not about conversions. This was far from conversions. This was about criminalizing the practice of faith. How can you, as a Dalit Christian, pray? You cannot. You're not allowed to. You cannot find freedom. You cannot find freedom from caste. You can simply not find freedom from caste. You should be shackled in the practices of untouchability and caste for the rest of your life, right? And so this moment of how the Kannada media exists as a Kannada media, which had the protection of the state and lay, seized in the fertile soil for bringing about a law which had such huge consequences, is a moment, I think, that needs to be marked to recognize the role of the media, far from what it was imagined to be in free India. The second instance that I want to talk about is the instance of hijab, the hijab ban, right? Many people don't know how exactly it happened, right? So there's something called college development committees. They had decided a dress code. There were a group of girls who fought against it, saying that we should be allowed to wear the hijab in our class because we want to wear it, right? And it was centrally a question of right to education. They wanted to continue to write their exams and study while wearing the hijab. What was the role of the media in this? So there is a very important moment in that entire decision making which happens in the Karnataka High Court, which is there is an interim order that gets passed. In that interim order, it says for status quo, which essentially means that the college development committees, whatever they have passed, it stays as it is, and the students don't get to write their exams with the hijabs, right? So they have to forcefully remove the hijab, disrobing essentially. Now, these are young women, and this was applicable only to colleges, mind you. What happens next? You see channels like Digvijaya, which is now owned by Republic Kannada. You see Public TV, you see Asia Suvarna Net. They are reporters with their cameras chasing the girls, asking them to remove the hijab, right? It's literally public disrobing. When the interim order does not ask for this to happen in schools. The interim order is of status quo, which asks for this to be continued in colleges, right? In that particular college, it's not a blanket order. It is not for everybody. And despite these clarifications, you see the direct impact, and the girls are running away. Those visuals still exist today. The girls who are being asked to remove the hijab, they're running away from the reporter. But the reporter doesn't care because it's not his fault, it's the editors. I am not going to put singular blame on the reporter, like similarly how I would not place blame on a police constable, because we know how the machinery works, right? If he doesn't get it, somebody else will. So it's because that was the ask from the editors. And we felt this was a time that we absolutely had to meet the editors, right? We had to go there and meet them and confront them, saying, tell us, in what sane world is this reporting? Forget ethical, forget anything. How is this journalism? In what sane world is this journalism? And so as Campaign Against Hate Speech, we went in a delegation and we met the editor. And you wouldn't believe, he was telling me, until we were sitting in that meeting and having that conversation of saying, how is it okay to chase them and ask them to disrobe? He didn't get the tonality of it until me, as a Hindu woman, who he perceived me as a Hindu woman, I said, do you want me to remove my dupatta here? Until I had to make that false equivalence, the gravity of it absolutely did not strike to him. And even then, there was a justification to say that, no, this is a regressive practice. You're a progressive human rights lawyer. How can you tell me that this is okay? How are they allowed to wear the hijab, right? Not once any reflection of how this is journalism. Not once any reflection of, no, this is our role. They shouldn't be allowed to wear the hijab. We want equality in schools. Equality somehow means no hijab, right? And the reason I'm pointing to these moments in Kannada media is because I truly believe that if Gauri was alive, things would look very different. I feel the Kannada media space would possibly look very different. Yes, we do have independent media today. Nobody's saying we don't. We have a great Varta Bharati, which has fantastic subscription and fantastic, coverage. We have a Idina, we have People Media, we have Kannada Planet, we have News Minute, we have many, 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 many independent medias. But there's also one more part that I feel like that really stuck with me from what about the characterization of the use of words of Gauri, right? Where she says, if I don't use harsh words, they might mistake my critique for a lullaby, right? I truly believe we are in that state today in Karnataka. There is a degree of co-option that has happened of the civil society as well to use polite words for this Congress government, where we have to fight for the protests, for a right to protest outside of Freedom Park, where we have to say that we can say Palestinian people exist. It's a genocide, right? And we have forgotten the value of critique, harsh, scathing critique in some senses. And I truly believe that um, it is the only way forward that I see in also in terms of the kind of weaponization of the law, right? The examples that I gave, the two examples, to fight the communalization in Karnataka, where it's also very interesting to me that the assassination of Gauri actually is similar to how a hate crime happens. Because what is a hate crime? Hate crime is essentially, it just sends one terrorizing message that it could be you next. And that's exactly what Sachi spoke about in the beginning. That's the message it sent, not to every journalist, but to every dissenter, saying you could be next in line, right? And to and how that has lent itself to the legitimacy of hate crimes in Karnataka. There has been a rise of hate speeches and hate crimes. How the right wing has completely abdicated all its responsibility to constitutional principles, which seems ironical to even say it because they never had any responsibility to the constitution in the first place. But the open disregard to the rule of law, and I think in marking anything to do with Gauri about her work, I think we have to keep in mind the words of Milan Kundera, which is the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And we have to not just remember for her for the person that she was, but what she really said, the sum and substance of what really she said and what she embodied for us. And I think with that, I will end with the hope that there will be many, many Gauris within Karnataka, that we will all take forward the dreams that she had of a Bahutwa rationalist Karnataka. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manvi. I was just reflecting that most of probably what you shared is something all of us have been a part of in some way or the other. We have engaged on those issues, on those fronts here in Kannada. But to put that into the way that you were looking at, not only through those instances, but what impact does it has, and probably where Gauri matters to us the most, uh, at least at the times when there is also, as you rightly pointed out, critiques that we are not as staunch critiques of the current regime in power in Karnataka, while as much as staunch critiques we were probably when the BJP was around. I think that is a key takeaway. Um, Thanks for that moving uh, discussion, actually.
Thank you.
Actually, you also brought out quite a few things. Maybe, as you rightly pointed out, we missed out on actually organically discussing the book much more uh, further. But anyways, I also noted a few questions that has come by. It's already 9. We were planning to have it as a 2-hour discussion, and I think we are running out of time. But there are quite a 2 or 3 questions that has come by. I'll just read them out. Um, Once I'll read the questions out, all of you can take a bit of time for you, all of you to reflect on those questions. The first question that came about was, uh, uh, yeah, uh, the first question is from Amir Sohail. His question is to Romig. Would the strengthening of the left be a counter sliding into fascist authoritarianism? Would your reading what is probably your reading of that history back at? So that is one question that has come by. Mohan Rao has asked one more question for Romig. He shares, I can see how you have changed as you wrote this book. Now you are you are now a committed journalist. Would you please talk about this and how the whole process of the book changed probably your whole ideas? There's one more question for Amulya. As a woman yourself, you have shared a fair bit on your journey. But I would like to understand your individual struggles through the process of the book, say the self-doubts, the intimidations, and other things, alongside the reality we are going through, and you yourself as a person. Um, uh, the person has also asked if only you are comfortable to share whatever is with us. Um, these are the questions that has come in. Um, there is also, I think, one more question. Yeah, I think I have covered all the three questions. Um, if at all there are anything, maybe we can take a round two. But I would probably request all of us to keep it short.
Yeah, I can jump in on the first question. And I just want to first, really appreciate what Manavi was saying. Really, this has just been such a fabulous discussion. I've really just been appreciating each participant's comments so much, and I was really uh, especially struck by the story she was telling about actually going to confront those editors who were uh, ordering that bigoted vigilante style really coverage of the hijab controversy, and it's actually an approach that is so rarely taken of going and directly talking to the people responsible. I'd love to hear more about it at some point. I'm just really we need to be doing things like this more, of a direct conversation, direct confrontation, when these things are happening. Um, I'll say, in answer to the question of how this process of the book changed me, it changed me quite a lot. It really just being confronted with how Gauri changed, you know, really, I think, my book covers a lot of ground and it's got a lot of different objectives, but I think one of the main things that the book is structured around is Gauri's transformation and evolution over many years. She really changed quite a lot over the course of her life. She remained the same fundamental person. She was always very passionate about injustice. She was always a lot of fun. These like basic personality traits, remain consistent throughout her life, but she changed quite a lot in terms of both her political commitment and her attitude towards journalism and the role that journalism should have and the way that journalists should approach their work. She famously, began as a pretty mainstream, conventional journalist, writing in English, taking sort of the traditional, objective, neutral sort of stances, even as she was very passionate in her private life about political questions. It wasn't really reflected in her work. And that changed dramatically, no coincidence, after she returned to Bangalore and started writing Kannada. As Madhavi pointed out, you have a completely different relationship to the ground realities of a place when you're writing in the local language, and you've got a completely different connection to your audience. And she felt that very keenly and immediately when she returned to Canada, or as you pointed out, didn't just return to Canada. She was in many ways becoming immersed in Kannada for the first time because she wasn't even educated in that language. Um, and yeah, you have, it's been a fascinating thing for me to learn and observe is what a different relationship to journalism and what a different relationship to the country Indian journalists have when they're writing in English versus any other language. And that journalism in non-English languages is a much greater threat to the status quo, that these journalists have a much closer connection to their readership than journalists writing it. And I know that as someone who writes in English myself. When you write in English, your audience could be anybody. It's vague and amorphous. It could be anyone in the world who understands that language. When you're writing in a non-English language in India, you know exactly who your audience is, and you're writing directly to them, and you have a direct relationship with them. And so necessarily, your relationship to the political reality of your place, it just changes entirely because everything is specific and everything is grounded. So I think Gauri really felt that immediately. She didn't just feel it, but she embraced it. And she quickly started rethinking her role as that of, first, she described herself as a journalist activist, which actually in journalistic circles is kind of a radical shift. Journalists are not supposed to be activists. It's really drilled into you. You know, I went to journalism school. This is really drilled into you that you're not supposed to be an activist. You're not supposed to be politically involved. I've heard of journalists in the United States who deliberately don't vote because they're like, oh, this would violate my objectivity. It's absurd. No, I'm a human being. I'm participating in the world. I'm observing things in the world. And also, I'm not writing in order to just put objective facts out there. If I wanted to do that, I could just write for an encyclopedia. And encyclopedias have their role. I'm not an encyclopedia article writer. I'm writing in order to I have agendas and I want to get them across. I want to persuade people and I want people to know the facts in order to affect change in the world. And so that is actually activism ultimately. And through Gauri's example, I really learned to not be concerned about these really outdated niceties, which serve the interests of these traditional monolithic media institutions that are so closely aligned with the political institutions that we're struggling against. And so like the New York Times has I've never been a staff writer at the New York Times. I've only written for them as a freelancer. They have very tight controls over what their staff writers can actually say and do in their own private, personal, political lives. And it serves the interests of the Times's own agenda as this incredibly, elite and powerful and wealthy institution with, close connections to institutions of power in the United States. And that's a very complicated relationship to be in because immediately when you join an institution like that, you are compromised because you are subject to that institution's agenda. Gauri was a totally independent journalist, and so she was able to completely sidestep that. And I'll tell you, we've talked so much about the crisis in journalism right now. And that crisis obviously predates the current political crisis, not just in the sense of that so many of these attacks on journalists pre-existed, but also just in that the business models are collapsing for journalism. The profession is a mess in terms of just being able to make a living or keep a job. But I will say, I'm actually really optimistic about the future of journalism. I genuinely am. First of all, because I think there's more interest in ever in journalism and in being informed, but people are unhappy with the kind of journalism they're getting. And people are tired of this institutional journalism that pretends to be neutral and unbiased, but is actually aimed at propagating the biases of the institutions, even if the individual journalists themselves cannot assert their own perspectives. But a beautiful thing that I see emerging is precisely because these business models are collapsing and newspapers are folding right and left. It's become a lot worse than in the US than in India, I think, but it's happening in India too. Um, uh, journalists have had to invent new business models of their own. One of the big things you see is these newsletters, Substacks, where journalists are creating their own audiences, and the journalists who are good at it are really making healthy livings doing this stuff, with the added enormous advantage that they're completely independent and they can say whatever they want, however they want. And so in that context, they're inventing new forms, they're inventing new approaches. There's just new tones that you hear from journalists now on these newsletters that we just haven't even encountered before in journalism. I find it really exciting. I don't I don't think I'd be good at it because I'm really bad at like building a personal brand and this sort of thing that's necessary in like hosting a successful Substack. But I'm really excited to watch it happen. Um, and I feel very optimistic about that. So, but just to say, in terms of the context of my own transformation, I think in a lot of ways is mirrored what Gauri experienced. Like now, I have no interest in not speaking directly about how I see things, because yeah, I Manu was also talking about just kind of the caution and politeness with we talk about things. I'm fed up with this too. It's the same in the US context. I mean, it's actually really striking how similar of a situation we're in, where we've got the opposition parties are so cautious and useless and seem like
Ideologically empty.
yeah, exactly. And they don't believe in anything.
No.
They don't believe in anything. The right wing has very clear, specific beliefs that they're very passionate about and they're acting on, and they have agendas on, and they have plans. And then on the other side, it's just this vague, opportunistic, and so it's not an opposition. It's just there. And I'm sick of asking for things politely, because just exactly as Gauri said, it's a time to speak directly and speak loudly. So I've really been feeling that keenly as a result of going through this process of writing this book.
Can I just quickly jump in, Shashank? I wanted to just say two things quickly on the question
Yes.
speaking clearly and this pretense of neutrality that journalists and journalism supposedly seems to have. I think we forget two things. That one, first, we're all persons living in a state, like in a nation state, right? And by virtue of that, we are all abiding to the constitution. And if there is a particular bare minimum mandate that we all have, there are neutral, it can't be neutrality. Our allegiance is to the constitution and the values of the constitution. And somewhere this languaging around the ethics of journalism needs to change, because when you're advocating for the constitution, what exactly are you really doing? When there is a new independent media emerging, one of the critical things that new independent media also needs to think about today is that how does it look at the question of the working class, right? Because if you're going to have subscription models, for example, if you're going to have paywalls, and if you're going to have different ways in which these things work, how are you really speaking to the people who are behind migrant workers in the city of Bangalore, or people who are working in a construction site, right? I think that's a very key question, because we don't understand that living in a democracy, we do have a right to news. We do have a fundamental right to news. And in that fundamental right to news, the providers of news have an obligation and a duty to us to talk in the language of the constitution and the realization of our rights, right? They can't call us corona bombs, and they can't call, places like this corona jihad, and they cannot be perpetuating these myths, because they have a responsibility to us to give us valuable news in the lens of the constitution. And I think that's often not spoken about because of the failing of, I feel, a lot of ways, US's ideas on free speech, and US's ideas in liberal democracies, and this propagation of saying that free speech and counter speech will itself equalize the marketplace of ideas. No, it will not. The consequences for those living who are marginalized are much, much severe. And they have a right, and they have a right in a democracy. And I feel like that needs to really be thought of in the context of journalism when we speak about neutrality. Yeah.
Amulya, did you have anything to add? I think you're on mute. Is it on mute?
Yeah, the host has to allow me to unmute.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much relatable. Yeah. So, to answer the question that was directed at me, the last time I think everybody saw me speaking was when I was 19. And now I'm like 25, running 26. And that was also the time that I was working for Rollo's book. So I visit my work once in a while to remind myself what learning looks like, because it's been 6 years of pathetic translation to getting somewhere. So yeah, so it was when I was reading for this book, I learned about the literary movements in India through P. Lankesh's autobiography, what socialist thought in Karnataka meant, or so on and so forth. So the charge sheets, on the other hand, it opened a new world of crime, right? This wasn't some white person getting murdered and going missing and a Netflix documentary on it. This was happening in Karnataka. This was Bangalore, my home state. This was so close home. So, and this is why I somewhere learned that this is why it's important to speak. And I must be honest here and confess that I absolutely had no idea what I was doing when it was CA and RC protests. Uh, like, not about CA, not about NRC, or in general about politics or activism. But I only knew that we must start speaking somewhere. And I think as a young adult, as a teenager, that was more pressing, and that was some outburst of energy, right? Like, I need to speak. I will speak even if it's wrong. I will dare to speak. So 6 7 years since then, I have definitely learned to read and learn more, because before we speak, I have understood that our opinions must be based, our words must come from interaction with news, with history, with dialogues with people, and besides it all, from a practice of tolerance to hear others and exchange thoughts. So, and apart from this, bringing my perspective as a woman, I still get threat messages. So I was showing my partner, like, look, I just got this message, right? Like, really language, really vulgar. And some people are like, oh, go to Pakistan. And I'm like, I don't have passport. So, right? I get trolled. And every time Independence Day or Republic Day comes around, several Indians of this country remember that I'm an enemy and find their time to look for my account and send a message. So, and I really feel that's okay, because our privilege cushions us, right? All of us here, or even otherwise in this progressive space that we call it, we are we are coming from certain privilege. I should mention that I had an incredible support system. Rolo even extended, to, like, see if there is a chance for me to migrate from India to the US or any other place. And my family, my friends, all these people, they were there. And we must utilize this privilege, this cushion, to speak up. We must dare to talk, and walk out of those comfort bubbles that we have, to ask uncomfortable questions. It does not matter, like, yes, I said Pakistan Zindabad, but it also brings a question like, why is it wrong? Why is the state dictating me that why I should hate someone, and why shouldn't I figured out that it's very easy to offend the state, and it takes only 2 words. So 2 words shouldn't be the limit to our speech as to tolerance level of the government, right? uh, Thoughts like these also shouldn't be some moving talk, somebody is inspiring, somebody is talking about it. We must normalize asking questions, and most importantly, not hiding behind a screen, not having a Instagram page without zero followers, or a locked Facebook profile. We must do this out there, because curiosity comes to human beings inherently, is what we understand, and we must ask questions, not just a form of dissent, right? It's because we can. And that is the freedom that we are born with, to ask question. It is not simply a right given to me by my government. I can ask questions, I can speak. So I remember having this conversation with Rollo also, like a few years ago. I think I told him I'm not hopeful at all, because 3 years had passed since then. Case was not getting anywhere. Trial was not going anywhere. Courts are not doing anything. And I was really I felt hopeless. Like, what am I going to do here? And what am I stuck in this country forever? Am I stuck in Karnataka forever? But I think now that more time has passed, I think I have an understanding of why I'm doing this. I will not use any money. I will not use my privilege. I will not use influence. I will not use means of absconding or leaving the country. I will stay silent. If that is what it means, I will stay silent. But I will not stop thinking. I will not stop learning. Because this is also what curiosity means. This translates to all people, irrespective of whether you're a journalist, you're a lawyer, you're an activist, even if you're a just citizen. You can ask, you can think, you can be curious. And we should all take the liberty to be curious and ask questions. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amulya. In fact,
Thank you,
actually,
Amelia. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So we are at 9:20 now. Uh, just a small thing. Manvi has shared quite a bit of links on the chat box. Uh, these were the few links that she was referring to while she was speaking, including the wages of hate speech report and the various press releases by hate speech, BEDA, or the campaign against hate speech, and then uh, quite a bit of reportage on human rights violations in Karnataka, just if in case all of you are interested to have a look at it. Also, uh, any of you want to come by for a minute, or we conclude?
I just want to say one thing in response to
Yeah.
what Amelia said. Amelia, I love that point that you learned that, it just takes two words to offend the government, and that's way too sensitive. And I immediately was thinking, in the UK, those two words right now are Palestine action. Um, and they supposedly have a liberal government now, but people are literally getting arrested for saying Palestine action in the UK right now. So. Yeah, it differs place to place what the two words are, but that's so often all it takes.
Uh, Thank you, Rollo, for that intervention. Also, I just reminded of two instances, two very different instances. I thought maybe we could conclude with something on the line. While Manvi was sharing quite a bit of instances from the hijab controversy that erupted in Karnataka, uh, it was actually in those times all of us were probably attending meetings after meetings to think about um, how do we as progressive groups fight such narratives being put on, and the whole attack that was being made on Muslim women students across Karnataka. I remember over the 2 3 days that it erupted, I had at least attended 10 to 12 meetings, and all of us were almost in a stalemate. We did not know how do we fight it back. What do we go on? Should we take the legal route? Should we fight it politically? What must happen? But it was in those times that women students from Karnataka itself showed us the way. There is one beautiful picture that was captured. While there was one picture of how women were thrown out of the gates of the college in Udupi, from the same college there were also images of students holding hand in hands, the Hindu women students and the Muslim women students um, holding hand in hands to take the students inside the campus. That itself, I think, was a great act of defense that I think if Gauri would have been there, she would have just rejoiced out of the sheer sense of solidarity and love that both of these students had for one another. Uh, I think that was one instance that keeps coming back to me in the history of Karnataka. If there is a moment that we would want to capture, I think something like that. Um, was one. And in one yet another discussion that I had again moderated for NAPM 2-3 years ago on Gauri Lankesh's death anniversary. A young comrade and somebody who had engaged with Gauri, Sarovar Benkikere, had actually shared maybe, if maybe, the revolver that Gauri was shot with was not working that day. And if at all there was a moment in which the murderers could actually speak to Gauri, then she would have invited them to also for a lunch, and then they would have sat down for uh, having a conversation, and maybe they too would have joined us in fighting the fight that we are fighting, was what he said. So it has stayed for me as to yes, Gauri was fierce, Gauri was fighting, but there Rollo's book also documents it that she had a compassionate heart that could involve everybody, right from the differences of political spectrums did not affect probably the shared sense of solidarity that she was able to force between communities, between ideologies here in Karnataka. So I think that I always feel, if at all, what if that had happened? What if they too had an opportunity to talk to Gauri, unlike just seeing her on the videos that they saw and attempted to assassinate her and things like that.
I just want to say, if Shiv Sundar was here, he would tell us that she would have called them for lunch, a smoke, and a drink. Just-
Yeah,
Exactly
I
right.
think yeah, we'll all consciously or consciously we are taking the fights forward. Uh, Gauri is one big legacy that we fall back on, big source of inspiration for us. And there are so many yet others who are doing the fights. We'll also remember the solidarities that they have lent to Gauri, that Gauri has lent to all these people. It's only through solidarities that I think we have been able to move forward. Um, Times are tough, but we'll sail through this one as well, I hope. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Maybe.
Shashank, Rohini, Neeta, and everybody from Bahutwa for organizing this. Really, it's
Yes.
been a very
Thank you
fun
both.
meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really been a special conversation. I appreciate it. I'm so sorry I couldn't be here from the beginning, but it's just been one of my favorite conversations I've had about the book. So thank you so much for organizing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rollo. Thank you, Amulya.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, you.
Thanks, Sachi and Shashank.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for making it. And yeah, I just wish we had planned this like 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier, because we barely had a week and Rollo just jumped in and he said he'll be here for the talk, and I was thrilled that he said yes. And then when I
Yes.
reached out to Manvi and Amulya too, she was like full.
You should
I mean,
definitely do this in person when you're around in Bangalore, Rollo.
yes,
Please
Yeah.
tell us.
That would be great. I would love that. And I feel so bad that I was late.
No, it's really
it's too much to explain, but it's
all right.
I hope it wasn't too
No.
too much of a hassle or stress. Yeah.
but this was really last minute, and I feel bad that we couldn't.
No, that's the point. All of you are losing the picture. Truly.
I thought this was fabulous. I really
Absolutely
thought this
fabulous.
was a fabulous
Really
discussion.
enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yes. And so happy to meet you all. And yeah. So let's keep in touch and let's do more in the future. I will be in I'm going to be in Kerala at the end of October. Wait, no, not end of October. End of November for the Malayalam Manorama Book Festival in Ernakulam. And I don't know, maybe if I would imagine I'll probably come to Bangalore too. So it'd be nice to at least connect during that time. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Definitely.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yeah. Thank you, Meeta, Rohini, and also Mohan.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I should jump off, but really nice to see you all. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.